The Adventures of Hercules, retold by Edith Hamilton. The greatest hero in ancient Greece was Heracles, whose Roman name was Hercules. He was the strongest man on earth. Like many other heroes in classical mythology, he was the son of a god, Zeus, and a mortal, Alcmene. Throughout his life, he suffered from fits of madness that the goddess Hera sent to plague him. In one of his fits, he killed his wife and children. In order to be purified of his crime, he sought the help of a priestess of Apollo, who brought him the message of the god. For 12 long years, he was to serve as a slave, carrying out all but impossible labors. As you read, determine which characteristics of Hercules show that despite his superhuman strength, he had certain human weaknesses. Eurystheus was by no means stupid, but of a very ingenious turn of mind. And when the strongest man on earth came to him humbly prepared to be his slave, he devised a series of penances, which from the point of view of difficulty and danger could not have been improved upon. It must be said, however, that he was helped and urged on by Hera. To the end of Hercules' life, she never forgave him for being Zeus's son. The tasks Eurystheus gave him to do are called the labors of Hercules. There were 12 of them, and each one was all but impossible. The first was to kill the lion of Nemea, a beast no weapons could wound. That difficulty Hercules solved by choking the life out of him. Then he heaved the huge carcass up on his back and carried it into Mycenae. After that, Eurystheus, a cautious man, would not let him inside the city. He gave him his orders from afar. The second labor was to go to Lerna and kill a creature with 9 heads called the Hydra, which lived in a swamp there. This was exceedingly hard to do because one of the heads was immortal, and the others almost as bad, inasmuch as when Hercules chopped off one, 2 grew up instead. However, he was helped by his nephew, Iolaus, who brought him a burning brand, with which he seared the neck as he cut each head off so that it could not sprout again. When all had been chopped off, he disposed of the one that was immortal by burying it securely under a great rock. The third labor was to bring back alive a stag with horns of gold, sacred to Artemis, which lived in the forests of Cyrenaica. He could have killed it easily, but to take it alive was another matter, and he hunted it a whole year before he succeeded. The fourth labor was to capture a great boar, which had its lair on Mount Erymanthus. He chased the beast from one place to another until it was exhausted. Then he drove it into deep snow and trapped it. The fifth labor was to clean the Aegean stables in a single day. Aegeus had thousands of cattle, and their stalls had not been cleared out for years. Hercules diverted the courses of 2 rivers and made them flow through the stables in a great flood that washed out the fifth in no time at all. The sixth labor was to drive away the Stymphalian birds, which were a plague to the people of Stymphalis, because of their enormous numbers. He was helped by Athena to drive them out of their coverts, and as they flew up, he shot them. The seventh labor was to go to Crete and fetch from there the beautiful savage bull that Poseidon had given Minos. Hercules mastered him, put him in a boat, and brought him to Eurystheus. The eighth labor was to get the man-eating mares of King Diomedes of Thrace. Hercules slew Diomedes first and then drove off the mares unopposed. The ninth labor was to bring back the girdle of Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons. When Hercules arrived, she met him kindly and told him she would give him the girdle, but Hera stirred up trouble. She made the Amazons think that Hercules was going to carry off their queen, and they charged down on his ship. Hercules, without a thought of how kind Hippolyta had been, without any thought at all, instantly killed her, taking it for granted that she was responsible for the attack. He was able to fight off the others and get away with the girdle. The 10th labor was to bring back the cattle of Geryon, who was a monster with 3 bodies living on Eurythia, a western island. On his way there, Hercules reached the land at the end of the Mediterranean, and he set up as a memorial of his journey 2 great rocks, called the Pillars of Hercules, now Gibraltar and I don't know how to pronounce that. Then he got the oxen and took them to Mycenae. The 11th labor was the most difficult of all so far. It was to bring back the golden apples of the Hesperides, and he did not know where they were to be found. Atlas, who bore the vault of heaven upon his shoulders, was the father of the Hesperides, so Hercules went to him and asked him to get the apples for him. He offered to take upon himself the burden of the sky while Atlas was away. Atlas, seeing a chance of being relieved forever from his heavy task, gladly agreed. He came back with the apples, but he did not give them to Hercules. He told Hercules he could keep on holding up the sky, for Atlas himself would take the apples to Eurystheus. On this occasion, Hercules had only his wits to trust to. He had to give all his strength to supporting that mighty load. He was successful, but because of Atlas's stupidity rather than his own cleverness. He agreed to Atlas's plan, but asked him to take the sky back for just a moment so that Hercules could put a pad on his shoulders to ease the pressure. Atlas did so, and Hercules picked up the apples and went off. The 12th labor was the worst of all. It took him down to the lower world, and it was then that he freed Theseus from the chair of forgetfulness. His task was to bring Cerberus, the three-headed dog, up from Hades. Pluto gave him permission, provided Hercules used no weapons to overcome him. He could use his hands only. Even so, he forced the terrible monster to submit to him. He lifted him and carried him all the way up to the earth and on to Mycenae. Eurystheus very sensibly did not want to keep him and made Hercules carry him back. This was his last labor. Hercules carried Cerberus. When all were completed and full expiation made for the death of his wife and children, he would seem to have earned ease and tranquility for the rest of his life. But it was not so. He was never tranquil and at ease. An exploit quite as difficult as most of the labors was the conquest of Antaeus, a giant and a mighty wrestler who forced strangers to wrestle with him on condition that if he was victor, he should kill them. He was roofing a temple with the skulls of his victims. As long as he could touch the earth, he was invincible. If thrown to the ground, he sprang up with renewed strength from the contact. Hercules lifted him up and, holding him in the air, strangled him. Story after story is told of his adventures. He fought the river god Achelous because Achelous was in love with the girl Hercules now wanted to marry. Like everyone else by this time, Achelous had no desire to fight him, and he tried to reason with him, but that never worked with Hercules. It only made him more angry. He said, "My hand is better than my tongue. Let me win fighting, and you may win talking." Achelous took the form of a bull and attacked him fiercely, but Hercules was used to subduing bulls. He conquered him and broke off one of his horns. The cause of the contest, a young princess named Deianira, became his wife. He traveled to many lands and did many other great deeds. At Troy, he rescued a maiden who was in the same plight as Andromeda, waiting on the shore to be devoured by a sea monster, which could be appeased in no other way. She was the daughter of King Laomedon, who had cheated Apollo and Poseidon of their wages after, at Zeus's command, they had built for the king the walls of Troy. In return, Apollo sent a pestilence, and Poseidon the sea serpent. Hercules agreed to rescue the girl if her father would give him the horses Zeus had given his grandfather. Laomedon promised, but when Hercules had slain the monster, the king refused to pay. Hercules captured the city, killed the king, and gave the maiden to his friend, Telamon of Salamis, who had helped him. On his way to Atlas to ask him about the golden apples, Hercules came to the Caucasus, where he freed Prometheus, slaying the eagle that preyed on him. Along with these glorious deeds, there were others not glorious. He killed with a careless thrust of his arm a lad who was serving him by pouring water on his hands before a feast. It was an accident, and the boy's father forgave Hercules. But Hercules could not forgive himself, and he went into exile for a time. Far worse was his deliberately slaying a good friend in order to avenge an insult offered him by the young man's father, King Eurystheus. For this base action, Zeus himself punished him. He sent him to Lydia to a slave to the queen Omphale. Some say for a year, some for 3 years. She amused herself with him, making him at times dress up as a woman and do woman's work, weave or spin. He submitted patiently, as always, but he felt himself degraded by this servitude, and with complete unreason blamed Eurydice for it and swore he would punish him to the utmost when he was free. As Hercules had sworn to do while he was Omphale's slave, no sooner was he free than he started to punish King Eurydice because he himself had been punished by Zeus for killing Eurydice's son. He collected an army, captured the king's city, and put him to death. But Eurydice, too, was avenged, for indirectly this victory was the cause of Hercules' own death. Before he had quite completed the destruction of the city, he sent home, where Deianira, his devoted wife, was waiting for him to come back from Omphale in Lydia, a band of captive maidens. One of them, especially beautiful, Iole, the king's daughter. The man who brought them to Deianira told her that Hercules was madly in love with this princess. This news was not so hard for Deianira as might be expected, because she believed she had a powerful love charm, which she had kept for years against just such an evil, a woman in her own house preferred before her. Directly after her marriage, when Hercules was taking her home, they had reached a river, where the centaur Nessus acted as ferryman, carrying travelers over the water. He took Deianira on his back and in midstream insulted her. She shrieked, and Hercules shot the beast as he reached the other bank. Before he died, he told Deianira to take some of his blood and use it as a charm for Hercules if ever he loved another woman more than her. When she heard about Iole, it seemed to her the time had come, and she anointed a splendid robe with the blood and sent it to Hercules by the messenger. As the hero put it on, the effect was the same as that of the robe Medea had sent her rival, whom Jason was about to marry. A fearful pain seized him, as though he were in a burning fire. In his first agony, he turned on Deianira's messenger, who was, of course, completely innocent, seized him, and hurled him down into the sea. He could still slay others, but it seemed that he himself could not die. The anguish he felt hardly weakened him. What had instantly killed the young princess of Corinth could not kill Hercules. He was in torture, but he lived, and they brought him home. Long before, Deianira had heard what her gift had done to him and had killed herself. In the end, he did the same. Since death would not come to him, he would go to death. He ordered those around him to build a great pyre on Mount Oeta and carry him to it. When at last he reached it, he knew that now he could die, and he was glad. "This is rest," he said. "This is the end." And as they lifted him to the pyre, he lay down on it as one who at a banquet table lies down upon his couch. He asked his youthful follower, Philoctetes, to hold the torch to set the wood on fire, and he gave him his bow and arrows, which were to be far famed in the young man's hands, too, at Troy. Then the flames rushed up, and Hercules was seen no more on earth. He was taken to heaven, where he was reconciled to Hera and married her daughter Hebe, and where, after his mighty labors, he has rest, his choicest prize, eternal peace, within the homes of blessedness. But it is not easy to imagine him contentedly enjoying rest and peace, or allowing the blessed gods to do so either. The end. Now questions.